The televised courtroom had never seen arrogance collide with consequences so completely. Brenda Marshall, a woman in her early 50s with a long history of filing questionable lawsuits against small businesses, sat in the defendant's seat radiating smug confidence, the kind that comes from years without accountability. Her polished finger lifted and pointed straight at Judge Judy Shaindlin as she delivered the words that would ultimately cost her everything. "Maybe you should calm your hormones, Judge. This is clearly an overreaction. You're being emotional and irrational, typical for women your age who can't handle pressure." The silence that followed felt explosive. The entire room shifted. What had been a routine proceeding instantly turned into something far more intense. Something that would later spread across social media and spark outrage nationwide. But what makes this moment unforgettable isn't just what she said, it's what happened next. Brenda didn't simply lose her case or face embarrassment on national television. What followed was swift, precise, and devastating. Within moments, the situation escalated into something far bigger than a courtroom dispute. Her actions would soon expose a pattern of fraud spanning multiple states, involving hundreds of thousands of dollars and dozens of victims. Brenda had operated with a system. Over several years, she filed dozens of lawsuits, targeting small business owners who lacked the resources to fight prolonged legal battles. Her approach was calculated: make costly demands, document refusals, and then file claims under disability and discrimination laws. Faced with legal expenses and public pressure, many business owners chose to settle rather than risk losing everything. Dozens of victims had paid her settlements, amounting to hundreds of thousands of dollars. She treated it like a business, structured, repeatable, and profitable. What allowed it to continue was isolation. Each victim believed they were alone in facing her accusations, unaware of the broader pattern. What Brenda didn't realize was that this time, things were different. Her latest opponent refused to quietly settle. After digging into Brenda's history, she uncovered a long trail of nearly identical lawsuits. She connected with other affected business owners and gathered evidence that contradicted Brenda's claims. Footage, documentation, and testimonies began forming a much larger picture. That information eventually reached the courtroom, and more importantly, it reached Judge Judy. Instead of treating the case as routine, the judge examined it closely. Records were reviewed. Patterns were identified. Previous victims were contacted. What initially appeared to be a simple civil dispute revealed signs of a coordinated and repeated scheme. By the time Brenda walked into court that day, the narrative she relied on had already started to unravel. She believed she was walking into another easy win, another settlement, another business owner who would fold under pressure. She had no idea she was stepping into a situation where every claim would be scrutinized, every inconsistency exposed, and every tactic challenged. For years she had relied on intimidation, manipulation, and repetition. But this time she encountered preparation, awareness, and accountability. And in just a few moments, everything she had built began to collapse. She later spent 8 years working as a paralegal at a small New Jersey law firm, where she picked up a deep understanding of how civil lawsuits function, and more importantly, how expensive they can be for small businesses to fight. In 2016, she was dismissed after multiple formal complaints from co-workers accused her of creating a toxic workplace, making inappropriate remarks, and attempting to access client files without authorization. That turning point pushed Brenda in a new direction. If she couldn't succeed within the legal system, she decided she would figure out how to manipulate it from the outside. Her first case wasn't even planned. In 2017, she tried to sign up for a gym, but the owner explained that the equipment had safety limits that couldn't accommodate her. Instead of accepting the explanation, Brenda saw potential. She began studying disability laws, filed a complaint with state authorities, posted negative reviews online, and then approached the owner with an offer. Pay $10,000 and the problem disappears. Within 2 weeks, the overwhelmed owner agreed. Brenda had just earned more in a month than she used to make in 3. That moment changed everything. Over the next 6 years, she turned her approach into a calculated system. She tracked businesses across different areas, paying close attention to those owned by immigrants who might be less likely to fight back. She studied which industries were most vulnerable to discrimination claims and identified businesses operating without strong legal protection or with limited financial margins. She didn't work alone for long. Brenda recruited 3 individuals who acted as witnesses, backing her claims in exchange for payment. She also connected with 2 unethical doctors who provided medical documentation supporting her allegations of emotional distress for a price. Every piece of her operation was designed to strengthen her cases and pressure her targets into settling quickly. But she didn't stop there. Brenda expanded her scheme into teaching others. She created a private online group with hundreds of members where she shared strategies and tactics. She sold digital guides explaining how to replicate her methods and hosted monthly sessions where she advised others on identifying targets and negotiating settlements. This side operation brought in additional income on top of what she was already making from her lawsuits. For years, everything operated in plain sight. Because her cases appeared to be civil disputes, they didn't immediately attract serious legal scrutiny. It wasn't until patterns began to emerge that the bigger picture started to form. What made her approach particularly effective was her understanding of pressure. She knew that defending against a lawsuit could cost tens of thousands of dollars, often more than small businesses could afford. She understood that public accusations alone could damage reputations, regardless of the truth. She used complaints, online reviews, and threats of media exposure to push business owners into quick settlements. Her demands were carefully calculated, high enough to profit, but low enough that paying seemed like the easier option compared to a drawn-out legal battle. What made her especially dangerous wasn't just the system she built, but her complete indifference to the harm it caused. She kept detailed notes on the people she targeted, identifying personal vulnerabilities and using them to her advantage. Financial stress, family situations, emotional pressure, nothing was off limits. For her, it wasn't just about money. It was about control. The ability to pressure someone into giving up everything they had worked for gave her a sense of power she continued to chase. Several businesses were forced to shut down entirely after dealing with her claims. Others suffered severe financial and emotional strain. Lives were disrupted, partnerships fell apart, and the ripple effects extended far beyond the courtroom. When she set her sights on Linda Cho and Serenity Wellness Spa, she followed the same method she had refined over the years. She researched Linda thoroughly before ever stepping inside the business. She knew Linda was a first-generation immigrant from South Korea who had spent over a decade working tirelessly before finally opening her own spa. She was aware the spa had been operating for under 3 years and was still finding its financial footing. She also knew Linda had recently taken out a small business loan to upgrade equipment and was working with very tight margins. Linda's reputation in the community was built on professionalism and inclusivity, making any accusation of discrimination especially damaging. To Brenda, Linda seemed like an ideal target, someone with a lot at stake and limited ability to fight back. Brenda called ahead and specifically asked about the weight limits of the massage tables, carefully setting the stage for a potential claim. When Linda honestly explained that their professional tables were rated for 350 pounds, which aligns with industry standards, Brenda still booked an appointment, fully aware she exceeded that limit and would likely be refused service for safety reasons. She arrived prepared with a hidden camera already recording. She had rehearsed exactly how to respond to create the most impactful footage. When Linda politely explained the safety issue and offered alternative services like chair massage, facials, and aromatherapy, Brenda launched into a dramatic reaction, portraying herself as a victim in a way that appeared convincing on camera, despite being entirely calculated. What followed was immediate and methodical. Within 2 days of the visit to Serenity Wellness Spa, Brenda filed a lawsuit demanding $50,000, citing discrimination, emotional distress, and violations of disability law. The complaint was prepared by her attorney, Randall Simmons, who had handled all her previous cases and profited significantly from settlements. He knew how to draft filings that would create maximum pressure, using strong language and serious accusations to intimidate defendants. At the same time, Brenda's associates began posting negative reviews across multiple platforms, accusing the spa of discrimination and poor treatment of clients. These reviews appeared within a short window using newly created accounts, but they were effective enough to severely damage the spa's online reputation almost overnight. Within a couple of weeks, local media picked up the story after Brenda shared edited footage and her version of events. The report framed the situation as discrimination, showing selective clips that lacked full context. The result was immediate damage to Linda's standing in the community. Regular clients stopped coming, new customers stayed away, and business partnerships were cancelled. Revenue dropped sharply within the first month, leaving Linda struggling to cover rent and pay her employees. But the financial strain was only part of the pressure. Brenda escalated further by filing complaints with multiple agencies, triggering investigations that forced Linda to spend countless hours responding and providing documentation. She contacted the landlord, implying potential liability issues, and reached out to suppliers in an attempt to disrupt business relationships. She even went as far as contacting the bank connected to Linda's loan, raising concerns about the situation. Each move was deliberate, designed to isolate Linda, increase stress, and create a situation where settling felt like the only escape. Legal fees quickly piled up, draining savings that had taken years to build. Even though Linda believed she would ultimately win if the case went to trial, the ongoing costs and damage to her business made the situation unbearable. The emotional toll was just as severe. Stress began affecting every part of her life: sleep, health, and work. The business she had spent years building was slipping away, and her family watched helplessly as the pressure mounted. Her husband took on extra work to keep things afloat while the business continued to struggle. Brenda recognized these signs. She had seen them many times before and knew exactly when her targets were nearing their limit. That's when she made her move. Through her attorney, she sent a settlement proposal. While maintaining her claims, she offered to resolve the matter for 50,000, presenting it as a way for both sides to move on, but fully aware of the pressure it placed on someone already overwhelmed. The amount was deliberately set to be crushing, yet still within reach if Linda emptied her retirement funds, refinanced her home, or borrowed from relatives. The offer came with a strict 48-hour deadline along with a warning. If she refused, Brenda would intensify the media pressure, file more complaints, and push the case all the way through trial while demanding even higher damages. In most of her past cases, this was the breaking point. The combination of rising legal costs, damaged reputation, declining income, and the promise of ending the ordeal pushed many business owners to give in. They just wanted their lives and businesses back. But Linda Cho wasn't like the others. Instead of giving in, she chose to fight back. She refused to let deception and pressure undo everything she had built. Rather than paying, she began digging deeper, and what she uncovered would eventually expose the entire scheme. She searched legal records and quickly noticed a pattern. Dozens of lawsuits filed over several years. She tracked down case details and began reaching out to other business owners, using community connections to speak with people who had gone through similar experiences. As she listened to their stories, a clear pattern emerged. Each situation followed the same structure: unrealistic demands, recorded interactions, accusations of discrimination, online backlash, regulatory complaints, and finally a settlement offer carefully calculated to push victims into compliance. Determined to gather proof, Linda hired a private investigator. Over the course of 2 weeks, the investigator documented Brenda's daily activities and compared them to her claims. The footage showed her moving around normally in public spaces, handling tasks without difficulty, and engaging in activities that contradicted her statements about limited mobility. Further investigation through legal channels revealed medical evaluations from multiple doctors, all indicating there was no condition requiring mobility assistance. The image Brenda presented in her cases was not supported by evidence. Linda also connected with a legal advocacy group focused on helping small businesses facing questionable litigation. Through them, she was introduced to an attorney experienced in handling repeat litigants who misuse the legal system. He had already been tracking Brenda's activities and had gathered information from several previous cases, waiting for someone willing to take a stand. When Linda made it clear she wouldn't settle, the attorney recognized an opportunity to bring everything into the open. He reached out through proper legal channels to the production team of Judge Judy, presenting detailed documentation of the repeated pattern and the broader impact on small business owners. He explained that this was not an isolated dispute, but part of a larger operation affecting multiple victims. Through persistence and coordination, the case was selected. As the show's research team began reviewing the material, the depth of the pattern became impossible to ignore. What they uncovered prompted Judge Judy Shaindlin to take a closer, more personal interest in the case. This wasn't going to be routine. This time, the situation involved someone who had studied the system carefully, but now faced someone even more prepared, with the platform and resources to reveal everything. On the day of the hearing, Brenda entered the courtroom on her mobility scooter, carrying the confidence of someone who had repeated the same strategy successfully dozens of times. She had spent weeks preparing, organizing her documents, reviewing legal points, and rehearsing how she would present herself. She brought neatly arranged paperwork, highlighting sections of disability law she planned to reference. She had practiced her expressions, aiming to appear composed and wronged. Even her clothing was chosen strategically, designed to reinforce the image she wanted to project. She had also coordinated with her attorney, expecting a straightforward appearance that might quickly turn into a settlement once the case was presented on the surface. What she didn't realize, what she couldn't have predicted, was that Judge Judy Shaindlin had already spent significant time examining every detail. The research team had compiled a full timeline of her previous cases, highlighting consistent patterns. They had spoken with multiple past defendants and gathered accounts of financial and emotional hardship. They had reviewed evidence that contradicted her claims, including footage showing her moving freely and handling physical tasks without difficulty. By the time Brenda took her seat in that courtroom, the situation had already shifted. For the first time, she wasn't in control of the narrative. They had gathered and preserved everything: Brenda's online training content, posts from her private group where she coached others on exploiting the system, recordings of her webinars where she openly discussed settlement amounts, and even the digital guide she sold explaining how to pressure small businesses using discrimination claims. Financial records revealed another layer. Investigators documented that she had failed to report hundreds of thousands in settlement income, labeling it instead as non-taxable compensation. At the same time, federal authorities were already examining her activities, focusing on how she used communication across state lines to pressure and extract money from business owners. By the time the case reached Judge Judy, everything was in place, not just to decide this dispute, but to uncover a much larger pattern. The courtroom carried a charged atmosphere as cameras started rolling. Judge Judy Shaindlin took her seat with calm confidence, fully aware of how the hearing was likely to unfold. Brenda positioned herself at the defendant's table in her mobility scooter, subtly emphasizing the image she wanted the audience to see. Across from her, Linda sat quietly, visibly drained, gripping her documents with unsteady hands, hoping this moment would finally bring clarity after months of stress. The gallery was filled with spectators, some expecting a routine case, others sensing something more significant was about to happen. After a final glance at her notes, Judge Judy Shaindlin began, her tone direct and precise as she summarized the claim. She asked Brenda to explain, in her own words, what had happened at the spa. Brenda responded with confidence, delivering a polished version of her story. She described arriving for a service and being refused, framing the situation as discrimination based on her condition. She spoke about embarrassment, emotional distress, and legal protections, presenting her argument in a way that sounded structured and persuasive. Her delivery was controlled and deliberate, as if she had repeated it many times before. She maintained steady eye contact, carefully paced her words, and even allowed her voice to soften at key moments to create emotional impact. But the judge's reaction remained unchanged. Leaning forward slightly, Judge Judy Shaindlin asked a simple question, whether Linda had explained the safety concerns behind the refusal. Brenda dismissed the explanation, insisting that the mention of weight limits was just an excuse. She argued that businesses should accommodate all customers and that refusing service under those circumstances amounted to discrimination. That response marked a turning point. The judge's expression sharpened as she followed up, questioning whether safety limits on equipment could genuinely be considered discriminatory. Brenda, attempting to reinforce her position, began citing legal expectations and obligations, suggesting that accommodations should have been made regardless. The tone in the room shifted instantly. With a firm, cutting response, Judge Judy Shaindlin pointed out that alternatives had, in fact, been offered. Multiple options that did not involve the equipment in question. And just like that, the foundation of Brenda's argument began to crack. When asked whether she accepted any of the alternative services, Brenda's expression tightened, clearly annoyed at being questioned. Something she wasn't used to after dealing with business owners who rarely pushed back. Those weren't what she wanted, she insisted. She had come for a full massage, and anything less, in her view, counted as discrimination regardless of other options offered. That's when Judge Judy Shaindlin asked a question that shifted the entire direction of the case. How many lawsuits had she filed against small businesses over the past 6 years? The room fell completely still. Brenda hesitated, her confidence slipping for the first time. She tried to deflect, claiming her past cases had nothing to do with the current situation. But the judge didn't let it slide. The question came again, this time sharper, leaving no room to dodge. Under pressure, Brenda gave a vague response, framing her lawsuits as necessary actions to defend her rights. But the judge had already opened a thick file sitting on the bench. Inside was a detailed record. Not just a few cases, but 47, each one following a nearly identical pattern. The judge laid it out, clearly targeted demands, recorded interactions, lawsuits filed, reputations attacked, and settlements extracted. The pattern was too precise to ignore. A quiet gasp moved through the courtroom as the scale of it became clear. Brenda's composure began to crumble. What started as confidence turned into visible unease as she realized this wasn't going to be another routine appearance. She tried to object, attempting to regain control of the situation, but Judge Judy Shaindlin shut it down immediately, making it clear she wasn't in a position to dictate anything. The judge pointed out that those past cases weren't irrelevant. They revealed a consistent pattern of behavior that directly mattered here. Frustration got the better of Brenda. Instead of staying composed, she lashed out, accusing the judge of bias and unfair treatment. That was a serious misstep. For a brief moment, the courtroom felt like it froze. Then, in a rare move, Judge Judy Shaindlin stood up. Her voice, firm and cutting, made it clear she wasn't tolerating any more deflection. She called out the situation directly, highlighting the repeated lawsuits and the harm caused to hardworking people. And then everything escalated. Brenda, abandoning all restraint, stood up from her scooter without thinking, completely undermining her own claims, and angrily pointed at the judge. She made a disrespectful remark, implying the judge was being overly emotional and unfit to handle the case. The reaction in the room was immediate. Silence, heavy and stunned. Everyone present understood that a line had just been crossed. Linda sat frozen, shocked by what she had just witnessed. Even Brenda's attorney lowered his head, realizing the damage had been done in an instant. The judge's expression changed, no longer just firm, but intensely focused. When she spoke again, her voice was low but carried unmistakable authority as she demanded Brenda repeat what she had just said. Instead of backing down, Brenda doubled down, repeating her insult and questioning the judge's ability to remain objective. That decision sealed everything. The courtroom remained silent as Judge Judy responded, making it clear that Brenda had just made a serious mistake, one that would have lasting consequences. She ordered her to sit down and stay quiet. Then, opening her file, the judge began breaking everything apart piece by piece. What followed wasn't just a response, it was a complete exposure. Case after case was outlined, each showing the same calculated approach. Businesses were selected carefully, often those less equipped to fight back. Situations were engineered, reactions recorded, and pressure applied from every direction. The strategy was clear: to create a problem, escalate it, and then offer a settlement that felt like the easiest way out. A long list of cases appeared, each one adding weight to the pattern being revealed. By the time the judge finished laying it out, the narrative had completely shifted. This was no longer just a complaint. It was the unraveling of an entire scheme. The total taken through this fraudulent scheme reached $412,000. The entire courtroom fell into a heavy silence as Judge Judy continued breaking down Brenda's operation piece by piece. Then her tone sharpened even further. But it doesn't stop there, Miss Marshall. It gets far worse. This isn't just basic extortion. You built a full-scale operation, teaching others how to run the same scam. You manage a Facebook group with more than 200 members where you share strategies for targeting vulnerable businesses and pressuring them into settlements. You even sell a $299 guide titled How to Turn Your Body into a Six-Figure Business, laying out step-by-step instructions on how to defraud small business owners. You host monthly webinars coaching others on how much money to demand and which targets are most likely to pay. You maintain a network of accomplices who act as paid witnesses for $500 per case. You work with dishonest doctors who provide fake medical reports for $1,000 each. This is not about disability rights, Miss Marshall. This is organized crime. Brenda's face drained of color, shifting from anger to pure fear as the depth of the investigation became clear. Desperate, she tried to recover, her voice barely holding together. Your Honor, those are unrelated activities. They have nothing to do with this case. Judge Judy let out a cold, humorless laugh. Unrelated activities. That's what you're calling a criminal enterprise. Now let's address your so-called disability. You entered this courtroom on a mobility scooter, claiming you can't walk more than a few steps. You've applied for disability parking permits and claimed severe limitations in every lawsuit. With a press of a button, surveillance footage appeared on the screen. It showed Brenda walking freely through a store, pushing a full cart, carrying heavy grocery bags, walking her dog for extended periods, and getting in and out of her car without any difficulty. I have reports from 3 independent doctors. All of them confirm you have 0 physical limitations requiring mobility assistance. That scooter is nothing more than a prop in your scheme. Everything about this act is deliberate deception. The impact hit Brenda all at once as her carefully constructed narrative collapsed in front of everyone watching. But Judge Judy wasn't finished yet. Let's talk about taxes. You collected $412,000 over 6 years. How much of that did you report to the Internal Revenue Service? Brenda's voice was almost inaudible. Those were medical settlements. They're not taxable. Judge Judy shut that down instantly. No, they were not. They were extortion payments, and that income is absolutely taxable. You reported 0 income while making roughly $67,000 a year through fraud. That is tax evasion. That is a federal crime. I have already referred your case to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, the FBI for wire fraud, and the State Attorney General for consumer fraud. Your attorney is under investigation for assisting your operation. Your accomplices have been contacted. The doctors involved are facing professional review. Your entire network is being dismantled as we speak. At this point, Brenda was openly crying, her composure completely gone. Judge Judy delivered her ruling with firm finality. Judgment is for the defendant, Miss Cho. Miss Marshall, you will pay $22,000 to cover legal expenses and an additional $50,000 in punitive damages. That brings the total to $75,000 due immediately. Your case is dismissed with prejudice. I will also be contacting all 31 businesses that previously settled with you and providing them with evidence so they can pursue recovery of their money. You wanted to lecture me about emotions. Let me tell you about real emotional damage. The families you pushed into bankruptcy, the dreams you destroyed, the businesses that shut down, the relationships that collapsed under financial strain. You exploited real discrimination for personal gain, and that is disgraceful. Get out of my courtroom. The gavel struck sharply, echoing through the room and sealing Brenda Marshall's fate. She stumbled out, no longer pretending to need the scooter, crying uncontrollably as the audience burst into applause. Linda Cho broke down in tears of relief, finally vindicated after months of stress and uncertainty. Within an hour, the clip of Brenda's comment and Judge Judy's response had already reached millions online. Within a day, it exploded to 180 million views across platforms. The phrase, "calm your hormones," began trending worldwide, but not in the way Brenda expected. It became a symbol of arrogance meeting undeniable justice. 6 months later, Brenda Marshall was convicted on the 28 counts of fraud, sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, and ordered to pay Ford $80,000 in restitution. Her entire operation was dismantled. Meanwhile, Linda's business flourished, growing rapidly and gaining widespread support. She went on to help other small business owners stand up against fraudulent claims. And in that courtroom, one message stood above everything else: facts will always matter more than manipulation.